All right, strap in everyone, because today we are taking a deep dive into the Mumbai real estate world with Arkade Developers Ltd and their Q2 FY25 results. We have the regulatory filing, a nice investor presentation. And hold on to your hats, we even got a set of questions. From a source who will remain nameless. I mean, who sends in questions like this? Is it a rival? Trying to get some intel, some super sleuth investor? I don't know, but these questions have me intrigued. Now, Arkade had an amazing Q1. So the big question is, did they keep that momentum going in Q2? Are they still the kings of Mumbai's luxury housing market? Let's find out. The investor presentation kicks off with this Arkade at a glance slide. And I gotta say, it's pretty impressive.
You know, what strikes me is, even with 38 years under their belt and 29 completed projects, they still manage to stay nimble. They highlight their in-house project management, asset-light model, zero net debt, and this laser focus on fast turnaround times and strong internal rates of return. All of that is really key in the real estate development world.
For sure. They've also developed over 5 million square feet of residential space, which means over 5,000 families are calling an Arkade development home. They really push their family-first philosophy. And it makes you wonder, is this just something they say, or do they actually walk the walk?
Well, think about it. In a crazy competitive market like Mumbai's luxury housing scene, family first is more than just a nice slogan. It's actually a really smart business move. When you cater to the needs of families and build communities, you're fostering a sense of belonging, which can lead to premium pricing and some serious brand loyalty. It's a long game, but it can pay off big time.
That makes sense, especially when you consider their CSR initiatives, which we'll get to later, but they seem to follow that family-first philosophy. Okay, let's get down to brass tacks, the numbers. Their financial highlight slide is where things get interesting. Revenue, EBITDA, and net profit are all up in Q2 FY25 compared to last year, and even Q1 of this year. So is this just the overall market demand, or is there something else going on?
It's a few things. Yes, the demand for luxury housing in Mumbai is definitely there, but Arkade is doing a lot of things right. The new projects they launched in Q2, especially Arkade Rare in Pandap and Arkade Nest in Mulund, are already bringing in pre-sales, which is adding to that revenue boost.
So it's like these timed project launches are helping them grow, even in a good market.
Yeah, exactly. And don't forget that asset-light model that we talked about before. By minimizing their own spending, they're operating with less debt and creating stronger cash flow. That is a huge advantage, especially in an industry that's known for projects that need lots of money.
Right.
And can just drain resources.
Right. So they're not just along for the ride. They're actually steering the ship. But is all this success going to last? Can they just keep beating the odds?
Well, that is the question, isn't it? There's some things that could slow them down, like rising interest rates and inflation. Those could make things harder. But let's focus on Q2 for now and look at those operational highlights. What are you seeing there?
Well, it looks like everything is going up. Pre-sales value, collections, area sold. They're all seeing big increases, both year over year and quarter over quarter.
Those numbers show how efficient Arkade is. Strong pre-sales mean they'll have more revenue in the future. Increased collections mean they have good financial discipline. And they're executing projects well. And of course, the growth in area sold is directly related to the success of Arkade Rare and Arkade Nest.
You mentioned that Arkade Rare is their biggest project yet, right? It has a projected turnover of 750 crore. That's a whole lot of square footage. So what's next for Arkade? What's in their pipeline?
Their portfolio ongoing and upcoming projects slides give us a look at what they're planning. What's cool is that they're not limiting themselves. They've got projects at different locations, targeting both the aspirational and premium parts of the market.
So they're really diversifying their portfolio. But what I find interesting is their move into the eastern suburbs of Mumbai. That's a bold move, isn't it?
It is. Expanding into a new market that might not be as crowded is a smart way to grow. And they're not just building from scratch. They're also doing redevelopment projects.
Redevelopment projects in Mumbai are a totally different ballgame, aren't they? What makes them so unique and potentially difficult?
It's like you're not just building some shiny new tower. You're trying to fit your project into an existing neighborhood. You have to navigate a ton of regulations and understand what the community needs.
I bet there's so many stories there. Construction delays, unexpected costs, even changes in demand. All of that could really mess things up.
Right. Totally. Redevelopment is a risky game. You need experience, meticulous planning, and efficiency to deal with all of those risks. Arkade's past success suggests they might be able to handle it, but we'll have to wait and see.
Speaking of experience, let's meet the people behind Arkade. Amit Jain, the CMD, Sandeep Jain, and Arpit Jain. The leadership team slide shows us their roles and what they're good at. What's interesting to you about this team?
What stands out is the family aspect. You have 3 generations of the Jain family leading the company. That says a lot about their dedication to Arkade's vision and values.
And that brings us to their Care Per SQV program, which is highlighted in their CSR section. Supporting the Tatum Memorial Hospital fits perfectly with their family-first philosophy, don't you think?
Totally. And it's not just for good PR. Investors are paying more and more attention to a company's ESG, environmental, social, and governance factors, Arkade's dedication to social responsibility, especially with their CSR initiatives, and sustainability certifications, makes them appealing to investors who want to support companies that share their values.
So it's not just about profits anymore, it's about having a good impact. Now, remember those mysterious questions we got? One that stood out was, how did real estate market trends affect Arkade Developers' performance this quarter? What do you think about that?
Well, we've seen that the luxury housing market in Mumbai is doing really well, which has definitely helped Arkade. But their success isn't just luck. It's about the choices they're making, like focusing on finishing projects quickly and expanding into new areas.
So they're creating their own success.
Exactly. But rising interest rates could make those fancy apartments less affordable, and inflation might make construction costs go up.
It seems like they're walking a tightrope. They're doing great right now, but they need to keep an eye on potential problems.
And that brings us to another interesting detail, hidden in the regulatory filing.
You mean the resignation of board member Hiran Tanna and the appointment of Sumesh Mishra? Now that's a twist.
Right. Everything seems to be going great. And then suddenly, a big change at the board level.
It makes you wonder what's happening behind the scenes.
For sure. Is this just a normal change? Or is there something more going on? What kind of experience and perspective does Sumesh Mishra have? These are questions we'll look at when we dive into Arkade's financials in Part 2.
So make sure to come back. Things are about to get really interesting.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Arkade Developers. In Part 1, we went over their awesome Q2 performance, their strategic moves, and that interesting board shakeup. Now it's time to really dig into their financials. I'm looking at their consolidated profit and loss account, and there are some numbers here that definitely stand out.
Let's look at their revenue from operations. The jump from 634.7 crore in FY24 to 327 crore in just the first half of FY25. That's a huge increase.
Yeah, but I'm also interested in their other income. It looks pretty low compared to past years. Should we be worried about that?
That decrease in other income might seem strange, but it's not necessarily a bad sign. It could be because of a few things, like lower interest rates on their cash, or maybe they've scaled back some of their side businesses. Since their revenue is growing so much, it's worth keeping an eye on. But I wouldn't freak out just yet.
Okay, that makes me feel better. Now, you mentioned EBITDA before. Can you explain that for our listeners who might not be financial experts? Why is EBITDA so important? EBITDA stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. It's a way to measure a company's core operating profitability. By taking away those non-operating expenses, we get a clearer picture of how well they're making money from their main business.
So it's like looking at the engine of their operations without all the financial distractions.
Exactly. And in Arkade's case, their EBITDA margin of 31.2% for H1 FY25 shows they have a solid business model that's generating cash to fuel their growth and make investors happy.
Now, looking at their consolidated balance sheet, I noticed a big increase in their equity share capital from FY24 to H1 FY25. It went from 152 crore to 185.7 crore. What's causing that growth?
That's probably because of the money they got from their recent IPO. Going public gave them a lot of funds, which strengthened their balance sheet and gave them more resources to pursue their growth plans.
So they have a lot of cash now, which gives them a lot of options, right? New projects, land acquisitions, maybe even buying other companies.
Exactly. That financial flexibility is a major plus, especially if the economy starts to slow down.
Speaking of which, their long-term borrowings have actually decreased from FY24 to H1 FY25. That's a bit surprising, isn't it? You'd think they'd be taking on more debt to finance their expansion.
It might seem counterintuitive, but remember their focus on that asset-light model. They're really good at using partnerships and joint ventures to reduce their own spending. Plus, they're probably using their strong cash flow to pay down their existing debt.
So it's not just about growing as fast as possible, it's about managing their finances carefully. But what's the main message we're getting from these numbers? What's the story they're telling?
These financial statements are showing us a company that's doing really well. They have great revenue growth, healthy margins, and a really strong balance sheet. Plus, they're managing their debt well
Hmm?
and showing that they're being financially responsible. All of this suggests that they're in a good position to continue being successful.
So everything is perfect for Arcade then. What could possibly go wrong?
Well, remember those board changes. Hiran Tana resigning and Sumesh Mishra being appointed. That adds a layer of complexity. We can't just ignore that. Tana was a real estate veteran. His leaving raises some questions.
It's like they changed their game plan right when they were winning. What will this new person, Sumesh Mishra, bring to the table? Will he shake things up or play it safe?
That's what makes this deep dive so interesting. We're not just looking at numbers. We're trying to understand the people involved, their motivations, and the decisions they make that shape the company's future.
And maybe even the future of the Mumbai skyline.
Exactly. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's go back to those questions from our mystery source. One that stood out to me was, what were the biggest challenges Arkade developers faced in Q2 FY25? And how did they overcome them? Because, let's be real, no company is perfect.
Right. Every success story has its bumps along the way. What hurdles did Arcade have to jump over this quarter? I'm thinking about the rising costs of construction materials. Because of inflation, steel, cement, all of that, that must have cut into their profits.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's something every developer in Mumbai is dealing with. But Arcade's focus on efficiency and getting projects done quickly is what sets them apart. By streamlining their operations and finishing projects faster, they can lessen the impact of those rising costs.
So they're basically outsmarting inflation with speed and agility.
Exactly. But keeping costs down is only one part of it. Another challenge they probably faced is the growing competition in Mumbai's luxury housing market.
Right. Everyone wants a piece of that action. So how does Arcade stand out in this crowded market? What's their secret sauce?
Their family-first philosophy is more than just a slogan. It's a big part of how they do business. They're not just selling apartments, they're selling a lifestyle, a sense of community, a feeling of belonging.
I see. It's about connecting with buyers on an emotional level, especially those luxury buyers who are looking for more than just a place to live.
Right. And let's not forget their focus on sustainability and social responsibility. These are things that matter to today's buyers and investors. Now, a question that everyone is probably wondering is, what's next for Arcade? How are they going to handle the rest of FY25 and the years to come?
That is the question. They've been doing amazing so far, but can they keep it up?
Well, things are looking good for the rest of FY25. They have a lot of projects in the works, a strong financial position, and they're in a market where people really want luxury housing.
But those economic problems we talked about could still cause trouble, right?
Definitely. Rising interest rates and inflation are things they can't ignore. But they're not just sitting around. Expanding into the eastern suburbs of Mumbai is a key part of their plan.
And what about those redevelopment projects? How do those fit into their long-term goals?
Redevelopment is a good move for Arcade. It lets them try different things, use their skills in a different part of the market, and help revitalize neighborhoods. It's a win-win for them and the community.
So they're branching out, trying new things, and not afraid to tackle tough projects. But let's not forget about those board changes. How might Sumesh Mishra coming on board affect their strategy going forward?
That's the wild card here. We don't know a lot about Mishra's background and experience yet. Will he be a force for change, or will he stick with what's already working? That's something we'll need to keep an eye on. But one thing's for sure, these board changes make the Arcade story even more intriguing.
It's like a real-life corporate drama. And speaking of drama, remember those questions from our mysterious source? One that I found really interesting was about investor sentiment and how it shows up in Arcade's stock performance.
That's a great point. Since their IPO, Arcade stock has been pretty steady, which means investors believe in their potential and their ability to deliver. But, as always, investor sentiment can be unpredictable.
So we'll need to watch how the stock market is reacting.
Absolutely. But even with all the unknowns and potential challenges, one thing is clear. Arkade Developers is a company with a strong base, a clear vision, and a leadership team that's willing to take risks. They're a major player in Mumbai real estate.
Okay, we've covered a lot, from their financial reports to boardroom shakeups and those curious questions from our mystery source. But there's still one big question. What does the future hold for Arkade developers?
That's what we'll talk about in the last part of our deep dive. We'll look at what might happen because of those board changes, connect Arcade's performance to the overall market trends, and try to figure out what it all means for their future.
So stick around. The final part of our Arkade developer saga is coming up next.
Welcome back to the final part of our Arkade Developers deep dive. We've really gone through their Q2 FY25 performance, looked at their financials, and even got into some boardroom drama. But we're not quite finished yet. We still have those really interesting questions from our mystery source, and I'm really curious to get your expert take on them. Let's jump in. These questions are really sharp. They make us think hard about Arcade's strategies and where they stand in the Mumbai real estate world.
All right, let's tackle this one. What is Arkade developers' outlook for the second half of FY25, and how are they preparing for future growth? We've seen their amazing Q2, but what's on the horizon?
It seems like Arcade is at a great spot to finish FY25 strong. They have a solid pipeline of projects, a healthy balance sheet, and they're operating in a market where people are really eager for luxury housing.
Yeah, that sounds like a recipe for success. But we've also talked about those potential economic challenges, like rising interest rates and inflation. How could those things affect their outlook?
That's the million-dollar question. Higher interest rates could make those luxury apartments less affordable, which might cool down demand, and inflation could continue pushing construction costs up, which would squeeze their profit margins.
What's Arkade doing to minimize those risks and keep growing?
Their expansion into the eastern suburbs of Mumbai is a big part of their plan. These areas have a lot of potential for development, and Arcade seems well-positioned to take advantage of that.
And how about those redevelopment projects? We mentioned them before, but I'd love to hear more about how they fit into Arcade's long-term strategy.
Redevelopment is a clever way for Arcade to broaden their portfolio and use their skills in a different part of the market. These projects often involve more than just building a new building. They need to understand the existing communities, navigate complicated regulations, and manage everyone's expectations.
It sounds like a real balancing act. But if they can succeed, it could be a big win for them and the communities they're working with.
Exactly. It shows how ambitious they are and that they're willing to take on tough projects. Now, there's one more question from our mystery source that I think is really relevant. How are investor sentiments reflected in Arkade Developers' stock performance this quarter? It's one thing to have a compelling story, but how is the market actually reacting to Arcade's actions?
Yeah. At the end of the day, the stock market is the real test. So how has Arcade's stock been doing since their IPO?
Their stock has been relatively stable, which suggests that investors are feeling positive about their growth potential and their ability to deliver on their promises.
But like you said before, investor sentiment can change in a heartbeat. What are some factors that could impact Arcade's stock in the next few months?
Those economic factors we discussed, like rising interest rates and inflation, could definitely make investors nervous and cause their stock price to drop.
And we can't forget about those board changes. Hiren Tanna leaving and Sumesh Mishra joining could signal a change in strategy, which might worry some investors.
Absolutely. Whenever there's a big change in leadership, it creates uncertainty. Investors will be paying close attention to see how Sumesh Mishra's vision fits with Arcade's current strategy and how it might affect their performance in the future.
It seems like Arkade Developers is a company that embraces both opportunity and uncertainty. They're in a fast-paced market, and they're not afraid to make big moves.
And that's what makes this deep dive so captivating. We haven't just been looking at numbers and trends. We've delved into the human side of things, the strategic decisions, and the forces outside their control that are shaping Arcade's future.
Well, this brings us to the end of our deep dive into Arkade Developers Ltd's Q2 FY25 results. We've explored their fantastic performance, unpacked their financials, analyzed their growth strategy, and even considered the effects of those boardroom shakeups. But remember, this is just a snapshot of where they are now. The Arkade story is still unfolding, and the coming months will show us whether they can handle those economic challenges, seize those strategic opportunities, and keep up that impressive growth. Until next time, keep an eye on that Mumbai skyline, and stay tuned for more deep dives into the exciting worlds of business and finance of